one of the most populous states with a part-time legislation, has a population of about 5 million. Michigan, on the other hand, has a population of 10 million, twice that. LaRange agrees that although the petition may be fitting for less populated states, it will not work for Michigan. The final reason why LaRange is opposed to the petition is that it disrupts the balance of power. The legislature can only meet outside of their 3 months if the governor authorizes it. This means that if any crisis requiring legislative action occurs outside of the 3 months, Michigan is at the mercy of one man. Therefore, LaRange believes that the petition gives the governor too much power. But LaRange is not only concerned with his term in office, but with all the terms after that. That is why he opposes the idea of a Michigan part-time legislator.
Thank you very much. Now for Mr. Pierce will be Andrew Hubbard.
Thank you. Ron Pierce is against a part-time legislature. He believes that 90 days is simply not enough time to manage the state of Michigan. It's 9.9 million citizens, and its $54 billion budget. It is true that a majority of states do not have a full-time legislature, but out of the top 10 states by population, of which Michigan is 9th, only Georgia has a part-time legislature. There are two main reasons part-time legislatures are determined by somebody to be necessary: an establishment that thinks it can do almost anything, and too much pay for legislators. However, Michigan already has an effective method of checking the establishment, term limits, and some of the strictest in the country at that. And having legislators pay, and cutting legislators' pay in half wouldn't come to 1/10,000th of what is managed annually. But there's one more reason Pierce is against part-time legislatures, and that is the balance of power. If legislators are restrained to only 90 days, they'll be forced to rely on lobbyists and staff for information and tactics, which will not keep them from creating restrictive laws, but will rather incline them to act on whatever they are told by lobbyists, which only takes power away from your vote. It is for these reasons that Ron Pierce is against a part-time legislature.
Okay, thank you very much. Also on the part-time legislature will be Mr. Graham Spitzer speaking for John P. Ingalls candidate.
Thank you. John Ingalls supports the part-time legislature and repeal the term limits for a full-time voter. This time will be 90 days, 3 months. Under a full-time system, they would spend more time in Lansing than in their own home districts. But under the proposed system, they go back to their home districts and live under their own laws that they made. In 2015, House spent 104 days in session. Senate spent 112 days in session. But we're in an election year, 2016. House spent 88 days in session. Senate spent 87 days in session. So in other words, it's doable. With this system, it will cause them to work harder on the more important bills instead of the not as important issues which has cluttered up the system. And it will not give special interest groups much of a year as it has. To repeal the term limits, it gives enough time for legislatures to be experienced and to do their work without being running almost constantly running for office. And it also causes the potential for more people to go for the legislature, and if it's part-time, they can hold a job, but also go to do their duty as a person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Also, finally, Mr. Barbara will speak on behalf of Mr. Ken Ferry's position in the part-time legislature.
Good evening. I am here to tell you why Ken Ferry is opposed to this new bill of part-time state legislature. So there are many reasons that Ken Ferry is opposed to this bill. First off, there are many benefits for continuing with a full-time legislature. Senators and representatives currently to design and co-over bills before voting for them. In addition, a study from Squire and Moncrief showed that legislative members are more likely to pay attention to their constituents and are more representative of their views if they work in a full-time legislature as opposed to a part-time one. The state government would take a drastic turn for the worst if this part-time legislative system were implemented. If we had a part-time legislature, then there would be only 3 months to pass any bills that need to be implemented for the entire year. The legislators would go back home for 9 months of that year, and as a result, sloppy, rushed legislation would make its way through the House and Senate because there just wouldn't be enough time to get everything done. Let's be clear, the reduced pay for legislators would have to be much less. Take on part-time side jobs, further distracting them from their duty to the citizens of Michigan. Kim Ferry also believes that the part-time legislator would be redundant, addressing a problem that has already been addressed by term limits. Someone might say that part-time legislation could work because it has been successfully implemented in other states, but this does not take the demographics into account. The states are large, with spread out populations and little economic diversity. Thank you, and remember, we can with Ferry.
All right, thank you very much. Let's give them a hand for that. You guys stay right here. We now have time for questions from our panel, 30 seconds each per party, 5 minutes total. So anyone can go in whatever order you need.
Hey guys, I'm going to begin with the questions for this topic, although my fellow panelists may jump in. So first, I have a question from the two parties on the far right. So Mr. Spitzer, you mentioned the benefits of a part-time legislature. Does it appear that have any specific numbers on the financial savings of a part-time legislature?
It will be saving around $700 to $800 million from taxpayers.
I'm sorry, how much?
7 to 8 million.
Okay, and Little Party, would you agree with those numbers?
Yes, that is accurate. However, it is a very small portion of the of the state budget.
Okay, thank you. This next question is for all three of the parties here that oppose part-time legislature. So over 40 states have some version of a part-time legislature, whether it's hybrid or a pure part-time legislature. Why do you think it's taken Michigan so long to come around to this idea?
Well, I believe that Michigan's large population is one of the reasons. In order to maintain the balance of power, the executive branch will be operating all year round. The judicial branch will be operating all year round, but the legislative branch only have 3 months. So any problems that would come about with a full-time legislature is a price willing to pay to keep all 3 branches accountable.
Maybe a follow-up question. How do you think Texas and Florida operate with part-time legislatures when Texas's population is over twice Michigan's and Florida's is nearly the same?
It could vary from state to state, but actually there are various types of hybrid legislatures, and as of right now, the petition that I was referring to, it would get Michigan on an entirely part-time legislature. So if another petition came about that would better enable the legislation to maintain the balance of power, then the range would be in support of that.
This next question is from the Labour Party. So could you talk for a minute about the decrease in power that's been talked about for the legislature if it were more part-time?
Well, so legislators are already limited to either 6 years in the House or 8 years in the Senate, and if they're given only 90 days during those years, then experience will be very hard to come by, except in the staff members who may have their own agendas.
Okay, thank you. All right, this next question is going to be for all 4 of you guys. What do you each of you the best argument is against your position and why should it not matter for the voters. And we can start all the way around my right with Will.
I believe that one of the biggest arguments I have heard is that the people making laws would spend more time with the people living under the laws. And while that same as rhetoric, the studies have actually shown that full-time legislators are more interested in what their constituents have to say and more likely to listen to them.
The strongest one would be the keeping the full-time thing, but the problem with it is that with full-time, they don't actually live in the kind of district that they serve, so they don't have to deal with their own rulemaking. So to them, it doesn't matter.
I think the biggest challenge is that people think that the legislators are spinning out of control, but term limits is an effectively prevents that.
I believe the best argument for the part-time legislation would be that it would reduce the money going into the legislation, and it would also reduce unnecessary legislation that the House and Senate are producing. However, the money is basically making a mountain out of a molehill because right now it's only 0.2% of the entire budget of Michigan, and the reason why voters should vote for the range is that he will make sure that the legislation is 100% on watch to keep the other two branches accountable.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Good job. The next issue we'll take up now will be the death penalty, whether we should adopt that in Michigan. Aaron Endline will be representing the Elm Party, Benjamin LaRange, Joseph Rainey, Ron W. Pierce, Celia Convis, John P. Engels, and Elena Adair will be representing Mr. Ken K. Ferry. And our panel will ask questions of these campaign teams. Make your statements first, excuse me, after, yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Since Mr. LaRange will not be required to sign any legislation on the death penalty, as would only be eligible to be changed by a constitutional amendment, he retains a neutral view on the death penalty and encourages Michigan citizens to let their voice be heard. LaRange is not remaining neutral to please everyone, but rather to encourage the people of Michigan to let their vote speak. Other candidates may argue about costs and benefits for capital punishment, but in reality it comes down to what the majority of the people perceive to be the correct and proper way to handle this proposition. If the people believe it is more beneficial and safe to have a capital punishment, then he encourages them to let Michigan legislators know. On the contrary, if voters believe it would be more beneficial and cheaper to support the prisoner's life sentence in prison, he encourages them also to let the legislators know. Mr. LaRange's campaign slogan, "Let's make Michigan great again," is not a slogan he chose just for fun. He truly wants to return Michigan to the core value of letting the people make the laws. He believes that when the people are allowed to make their voice heard, it will restore some of Michigan's prior prestige. Because the issue of the death penalty can be so complicated, LaRange encourages voters to educate themselves on the process of a constitutional amendment. He wants you to know that the amendment would need to cover questions, such as any age restrictions on capital punishment, how much evidence would be needed, and what capital crimes would be punishable. Because of the many facets in this issue, Mr. LaRange is happy to step back and let the people's vote do the talking. He has promised to support whatever choice a majority vote entails. Through letting your vote count, you can help achieve the goal of making Michigan great again.
Thank you very much. Representing Mr. Pierce will be Mr. Joseph Rainey.
Ron W. Pierce wishes to proactively hit crime head-on, as well as continuing the fight to maintain a safe society. That's why Ron Pierce supports the introduction and use of capital punishment in the state of Michigan. In an attempt to sustain economic viability and to help families that fall victim to violent and tragic crimes, he will also institute 3 points of criteria to determine whether someone can be sentenced to execution. Handling these issues with a circumstantial mindset. The individual must be over 25, must have overwhelming evidence against them, and must be sentenced to life without parole. Dr. Paul H. Rubin, professor of economics at Emory University, said in 2006 that recent research on the relationship between capital punishment and homicide has created a consensus among most economists who have studied the issue that capital punishment deters murder. The modern studies have consistently shown that capital punishment has a strong deterrent effect, with each execution deterring between 3 and 18 murders. As well as the issues pertaining to a vibrant society, Pierce also wishes to reallocate funds and cut taxes where he can, with a firm understanding that taxpayers of Michigan spend around $280 million annually on prison costs alone, according to the Michigan-wide media group. The cost of prison extends into the larger economy, and high prison costs can cut into funding for other important areas of education, according to a CNN report. This stance holds fast with the retributive mode of government, and Pierce believes that on this and many other issues, we can work together to reallocate costs, deter future crimes from occurring, and at all costs work for the betterment of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to challenge the Labour Party's representative. You mentioned economic viability, crime deterioration, and that the person might be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. A death penalty case actually costs significantly more than it costs to keep someone for life the entire time in prison. In U.S. states, there is no state that has a death penalty that has a lower crime rate than the average crime rate of the states with the death penalty. And if someone was already sentenced to life in prison without parole, why would they be undergoing double jeopardy?
Well, to answer that question of how much exactly the death penalty will cost, it's a difficult one due to the fact that there are crazy circumstances for each case. You're going to find that per state and per issue, there's going to be an incredible difference of allotment of cash to the issue, due to the circumstantiality of the crime.
Okay, now we will have Cyril Convis speaking on behalf of John Ingalls on his position on the death penalty.
John P. Ingalls strongly opposes an amendment to our Constitution that would allow the death penalty. Michigan was the first state in the U.S. to abolish the death penalty, and there's no evidence for adopting it now. Although some may claim that it will save money, the facts tell us otherwise. Federal homicide cases in which the death penalty is sought cost an average of 8 times more than homicide cases in which the death penalty is not sought. And cases under state's jurisdiction cost more too. The number varies. In Oklahoma, it costs $700,000 more per case. In Pennsylvania, $2 million more per case. But one thing is consistent. In all these states, death penalty cases cost more money, taxpayer money, than life imprisonment. Additionally, the death penalty doesn't prevent homicide. In every single year for the past 25 years, states with a death penalty have had higher homicide rates than states without a death penalty. Moreover, the death penalty violates civil rights. For example, African Americans make up about half of homicide victims, but over 75% of cases in which the defendant was executed involved white homicide victims. Simply put, you are more likely to receive the death penalty for killing a white person than a black person. This disparity also applies to interracial homicides. A black person is more likely to receive the death penalty for killing a white person than a white person who has killed a black person. Allowing the death penalty has no benefits. On the contrary, it is costly, ineffective, and it allows for injustice. John P. Ingalls stands against the death penalty.
Thank you very much. Also, finally, to speak on this candidate would be Elena Adair for Ken Ferry.
Ken Ferry is strongly opposed to the death penalty being set in place in Michigan. Studies have shown that the statistics and research is proving the vast ineffectiveness and pointlessness of the death penalty. First, out of every 1 in 25 people in America that has been found that they were actually innocent after they were executed. This statistic is something that Ferry absolutely cannot stand behind. Second, the idea that the death penalty is a deterrent on crime is fundamentally flawed. This is because most often the criminal is not actually in their right mind or gave no thought of being caught when they are in the middle of committing a crime. In fact, the southern states account for 80% of all the executions from the entire United States, yet still have the highest murder rates. Third, the death penalty does not save money. For example, in California, they have spent $5 billion since 1973 on the executions of only 13 people. Michigan is saving a massive amount of money by not having capital punishment within our state. Fourth, the death penalty often does not have a comforting effect on the victim's family. In the case of the Boston Marathon, Bill and Denise Richards, the parents of a 9-year-old boy who was killed in the attack, said this: "The continued pursuit of that punishment, or the death penalty, could bring years of appeals and prolong the most painful days of our lives. We as a state cannot stand behind the death penalty being put into place here in Michigan due to huge economical and moral reasons. Ken Ferry will make sure that we never have to."
Thank you very much. All right, that ends the statement time. We'll now move to question time.
I'm sorry, it's me again. I want to do this portion, and my colleagues might again jump in if they have questions. So the first question, I want to kind of ferret out this difference between the Ingles party, the party for Mr. Engel, and the Pierce camp with the numbers. Can you guys briefly talk about the numbers when you got them, compare those stats again? We'll start with the Pierce camp.
Of course. Would you repeat the question?
Yes, so the numbers you mentioned about deterrence, and then the numbers again, you mentioned the economic value of the death penalty. Maybe talk about those again.
Certainly. According to a source using the 1994 Federal Justice Department figures, the cost for life without parole in a death penalty equivalent case could come to $3.7 million. While costs for the death penalty could be used as low as $1.98 million. This will save nearly $1 million in this particular case over the long run. This may seem like an insignificant amount, but what people need to realize is that with great, you need to seek solid results. Thank you.
Okay, so the representative from the Maple Party mentioned statistics from 1 year. Over the past 25 years, according to the Bureau of Justice statistics in various state bar associations, the death penalty cases do cost significantly more. The two states I cited, Oklahoma, that was found in a study done by Seattle University, and Pennsylvania, that was a study done by the Reading Eagle, a newspaper. Crime not being an effective deterrent, that I got from the FBI Uniform Crime Report on homicide rates in each state.
Okay, so I have a question for Mr. Grady. Now, based on the new findings that years after a prisoner was executed, it actually comes to light that they were indeed innocent, and these findings are multiplying. So with this knowledge in mind, what new method will Mr. Pierce bring to the table to ensure that innocent people will not be executed?
That is a serious issue. We have come across many of those issues and situations where innocent people have been put to death. That's why Pierce wishes to institute a policy that relies heavily on overwhelming data that supports the fact that they were in fact guilty. In the case of Eric Nance, who killed and raped the woman Julie here, they specifically made it sure to take him down because of the overwhelming DNA evidence. Thank you.
One more question for Pierce's representative. So you say that we'd like to save tax money through the death penalty, and you have 3 points that must be met. Must be confined, there must be overwhelming evidence, and they must be convicted for life without parole. How frequently is somebody convicted under those 3 conditions on an annual basis, and thus how much money would we actually be saving?
Well, what you have to do is basically look at all the standings from different viewpoints. What needs to be done is looking from a lot of data. You must make sure that you keep into mind the different stances, as well as keeping in mind that to make real progress, you need to take small steps.
I do have a challenge for the Maple Party. He's mentioned that DNA testing will make sure that it's actually accurate, which I have found, and Ferry has found, that And actually, the DNA testing has been proved to be false in different cases. It's more rare, but it still can convict an innocent person.
That's true. DNA can be placed to evidence of the scenes of a crime as evidence. However, it comes down to the fact that you can't judge all cases of DNA based on the fact that some are misled because of fake DNA.
All right, we have time for one more question. It's going to be directed to the range camp. So in some of your official statements on this issue, your candidate has just relied on the economics of the death penalty, hasn't gotten into the ideas of punishment, retribution, that sort of thing. Do you think that his stance is cold because he's only talked about the economic side? Do you think that that stance shows sort of a human feeling side to him?
He has not only appealed to the economic side, he wants the people to say how they feel about taking someone's life and how they want this to be handled. He's just not concerned about numbers because how can you place numbers on someone's life?
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give these folks a great hand for their work on that issue. Okay, moving on to the next issue, we're going to talk about this topic of cell phones and emergencies and privacy with locations. We have Elizabeth Mayen representing Mr. LaRange, Isaiah March representing Mr. Pierce, Mayor Beth Mon representing Mr. Ingalls, and Jack Menega representing Mr. Ferry. You all might have your opening statements, starting with Mr.
Benjamin D. Lestrange strongly believes that the House bill that requires wireless carriers to provide the location of requested wireless devices to law enforcement officers in instance of imminent threat or harm without a warrant should be passed. LaRange believes that wireless carriers should be required to provide their information without a warrant so that in case of an emergency, they can be found quickly. He believes that using the location on cell phones can save a life, which allows people to keep all their liberties instead of losing their lives and everything else. And it can also be used to find criminals and stop them from doing further harm. The most commonly used example of a time that it could have saved a life is the story of Kelsey Ann Smith. Kelsey was an 18-year-old girl from Overland Park, Kansas. She disappeared on June 2nd, 2007, and was murdered that evening. Her body was found near a lake in Missouri on June 6, 2007. Investigators asked her phone company for access to her location through her cell phone, but they were denied that information for 4 days. As a result, they did not find Kelsey until days later when they found her dead. If the phone companies had just given the location, Kelsey could have been found much faster, and it could have saved her life. LaRange wants to fix this problem and be able to save more lives. The terms in this bill are not vague. The bill specifically says, in instances of imminent threat or harm. Of course, the law enforcement will need some form of evidence of the investigation so that the information is not given to someone trying to cause harm. LaRange believes that House Bill 4006 should be passed.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to challenge the Elm Party. You mentioned briefly towards the beginning of your speech that this would ensure the liberties of the people that would be affected under this bill. Safety for the masses, when it means the government tracks your location, when they get to decide, when they get to interpret what it means for you to be in an emergency, that's not liberty. When Big Brother is watching over you and that becomes lawful, that's an exploitation of your liberty, a violation of your liberty more than anything else. This position sets an incredibly dangerous precedent for your freedom. Thank you.
They are not given the location. They don't even look, they're not supposed to look at the location unless it is an emergency that they can prove that there is an investigation for it, so the location is not used for anything else.
Okay, continue down the line.
As my colleague Mr. Rainey said, candidate Ron Pierce wishes to hit crime head-on. He believes that the police should be granted access to cell phone location information from the carrier in cases of emergency. He believes that this will help to improve how fast and effectively the police may recover someone who is in imminent risk of death or serious harm at the hand of another individual. By supporting access to cell phones, Mr. Pierce would be hoping to speed up investigations involving captured or kidnapped individuals if he were elected governor. Because of how dangerous kidnappings are, Pierce believes that by speeding up investigations, the police would be better enabled to help save victims and capture those who have committed such felonies. Should he be elected governor, Ron Pierce would support amendments on the bill dealing with cell phones in the case of emergencies that would include establishing a 24-hour time period before the police could seek the location information from a carrier, and an amendment that would extend the time that the police may request access to a cell phone's location until the missing individual has been successfully liberated. He would also support a further amendment to place a larger monetary penalty on police who overstep their jurisdiction with the information obtained from the carriers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We also have Mayor Beth Long representing John Ingalls.
Thank you. John P. Ingalls does not support the cell phones and emergencies bill as it is currently written. There are problems with the bill that he does not support. First, the bill has no mention of definition of what an emergency exactly is. Since the bill does not state a definition, it leaves it up to the judgment of the law enforcement to decide what constitutes an emergency. Second, it is unconstitutional. Ingalls believes this bill is unconstitutional because it violates the Fourth Amendment, which states, the rights of the people to be secure in their persons and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and their warrants shall be issued, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly described in the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Lastly, Ingalls also believes this bill violates citizens' privacy. By opposing this bill, Ingalls will fully defend citizens' privacy. This bill says that the law enforcement can use tracking on a person's phone to find them in an emergency. The bill doesn't fully define what type of emergency. Since the bill does not define an emergency, there is no way of being sure that the law enforcement will use tracking for its intended, will use the tracking for is intended for a probable cause. Because as the Fourth Amendment states, there doesn't have to be a warrant issued, but to do a search there needs to be a probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. By opposing this bill as it is currently written, Ingalls is defending your constitutional rights. Ingalls does not support this bill because it is not a complete piece of legislation. He is protecting your privacy and the invasion of your Fourth Amendment rights.
I would like to counter oath party. If someone gets kidnapped and they are not found in time because the cops could not trace their cell phone and are killed, A, the killer is still in society because he got away and could endanger other people, and B, you cannot enjoy your liberties if you're dead.
His stance on this bill is that they're not taking the rights away from the people owning the cell phones to give the law enforcement use of the tracking device. It's so that the law enforcement will not be able just to use the tracking without a warrant and to limit how much they are, because the bill doesn't define what exactly an emergency is. So they could, an emergency could be anything.
Okay, very good. All right, finally, position on this issue for Mr. Ferry by Jack Menega.
Thank you. Ken Ferry believes that privacy is an extremely integral part of our American legacy, and that it is a right protected by the Fourth Amendment. As Ferry is an intense supporter of the Constitution as it was originally meant to be interpreted, this is something that he cares about deeply. But, on the other hand, with recent advances in technology, there have been situations where lives could be saved through simply finding the abducted person's cell phone location. So, how do we find a solution that brings balance between these two benefits? Ferry has a plan. He will propose an amendment to the bill stating that all cell phone owners have the choice to give or withhold permission for wireless carriers to provide the necessary information to law enforcement in the case of an emergency. Think of it like a firewall for a computer system. It's not a required tool, but one that you can activate in the hopes of safeguarding yourself from a harmful virus. Likewise, it is not mandatory to sign up for either option, but allows the people of Michigan to have the choice to either safeguard themselves by choosing to allow their phone to be tracked in an emergency, or maintain their privacy without the potential for their phone to be tracked. However, FERI would like it to be made very clear that if citizens were to allow their phone to be tracked, it would be reserved only to emergency situations, and it would be simply pinging the phone to be located. Absolutely no access will be granted to any text messages, social media, or photos. Also, in the case of cell phone users under the age of 18, the choice would be given to the parents. Ken Ferry truly believes in the security of the people, but also in their right to privacy, and he will fight to support both of these ideas in the fresh, unique proposal in his role as governor. Thank you.
I would like to change the room. So you said for the firewall type thing that was if you're below the age of 18, then you can't choose. So what about children in abusive homes where the parents won't make that kind of good choice for the child? How will you protect those children?
Well, in that case, then those children, So, yeah, in that case, the federal government would take charge of that because they're in an abusive home. And obviously, their parents, if their parents notified the government, then I think that would be up to the judgment of the law enforcement to decide whether those parents were abusive.
So I have an open question. I'm wondering if any of you can enlighten us on how much time is actually expected to be saved by a police officer just requesting a search instead of going through the process of getting a warrant to request the search. Can anyone answer that?
So there was a case in New Jersey where there were a couple teenagers who got lost in the woods in South Brunswick, and it took the police 18 minutes to find them with their cell phone ping.
At what point in that case did they start searching?
They started, I don't have the information at this point.
All right, so if the police officers are often required to wait 24 hours before they can begin their search, is saving a few extra minutes really that big of a deal?
Absolutely, I think it is, because that can be the difference between life and death. And I think if we have that authority, then we need to use it in the best way that we can. And I think that Ken Ferry has proposed the best plan for this option.
All right, so in this situation, as the representative from Eagles stated, there really isn't a definition for emergency. I'm curious to know how your candidate would define emergency and how they, if they fully agree with the bill in that regard.
Candidate Pierce, as I've said before, he would like to make some amendments to the bill. I think clarifying what an emergency is. So we currently have a working definition. Emergency would be a situation in which an individual is in imminent risk of death or serious physical harm at the hands of another individual. And Candidate Pierce that's where he stands on what an emergency is.
I think that emergency is more of a general definition. Everybody knows what it is. I gave an example in my speech of what an emergency kind of situation would be, like kidnapping or something like that, where they have proof that it is like a life or death situation.
Indians would be supportive of this bill if it went back and emergency was more defined, and if the right and to the local communities for them to define what an emergency is, so the bill would be supporting more of the citizens of Michigan.
All right, so Mr. Ferry is offering
the idea of having an amendment to this bill that people could opt in for this option. And I'm curious to know if the other candidates would also support an amendment like that. And if we could start with Lagrange. It would be an amendment that would enable everyone to register either to opt in or to opt out of allowing the search.
I think if the people want that, yes.
Okay.
I believe Ron Pierce, he definitely consider that. He definitely wants to keep the people, he wants them to, he wants the choices to be kind of in the hands of the people and not kind of as much standing over and controlling them. So if people feel that this gives them more freedoms, he would definitely consider that amendment.
John Ingles would also be in favor of that amendment because he likes supporting the rights of the people and giving the people a choice of what they want to do in each situation.
All right, we're going to move on. Okay, that's the end of that discussion. Let's give these young folks a good hand for their work. Okay, the final round of statements will be on the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution. Representing Mr. Lagrange will be Ben Alari. Representing Mr. Pierce will be Sarah Eby. Representing Mr. Ingalls will be Sean Budlow. And representing Mr. Ferry will be Eva Marie Solak. Mr. Lagrange's spokesman goes first.
All right, thank you for all coming out today. Mr. Lagrange's number one goal for issues arising from the Second Amendment is to make sure that the citizens of Michigan are safe. He plans to do this by keeping in place current gun laws in Michigan. The laws in Michigan that Michigan currently has in place are extremely effective in doing their job, and because of this effectiveness, there have only been 2 mass shootings in Michigan in the past 60 years. He also believes that because the current laws are effective, no new ones need to be passed. As you can see, he's a very big fan of the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Another of his reasons that stricter gun laws won't make people any safer. Criminals are criminals, and they're going to commit that crime whether there's a law against it or not. So all that stricter gun laws are going to do is make it harder for law-abiding citizens to defend themselves and the others around them from those criminals. Here's one example of this. A veteran walked into a liquor store in Michigan on a Thursday night and found 29-year-old Tremel Jackson beating a woman who was working there. Fortunately, the veteran was carrying a legally owned handgun because when he ordered Jackson to leave the woman alone, Jackson reached for his own weapon. It was then that the veteran pulled out his own gun and fired 2 shots into Jackson, ending the incident right there. The woman says, if it weren't for the aid of the veteran, she surely would have died. Quote, God sent me an angel because I know Jackson would have killed him. Think of the situation if there aren't laws in place that wouldn't have allowed the veteran to carry his handgun. He wouldn't have been able to assist the woman, and she most likely would have died. This is just one of many instances where the ability for the citizens to be armed has saved lives. This is exactly what Mr. Lagrange wants to do, protect our rights to carry. Please vote for Mr. Lagrange.
Thank you. Sarah Eby for Mr. Pierce.
Good evening. If elected, Ron Pierce intends on maintaining current gun laws. Our team has done extensive research, and multiple studies have shown that when harsher gun restrictions are implemented, gun violence goes up. This is because by prohibiting law-abiding citizens from purchasing guns, it creates a more vulnerable environment for those who obtain guns illegally to open fire. One can look at countries in Africa, South America, and parts of Europe where strict gun control is implemented. According to the Crime Prevention Research Center,
The gun violence of these countries is much more frequent than that of countries such as Switzerland, Serbia, and Finland, where gun ownership is widespread and gun violence is rare. He believes that the largest mass shootings of our country, such as the Orlando nightclub massacre, would have had less fatalities had victims been armed. This is not to say that gun control is in and of itself wrong. It would be foolish to hand out lethal weapons like lollipops. This is why he's not abolishing the law altogether, but instead acknowledging the current laws generally do a good job regulating guns. Ron Pierce is under no illusions. We live in a fallen world where criminals will always be able to acquire guns illegally through the internet and other connections. He finds it unfortunate that guns are even necessary. However, he believes it to be his job as public servant to enable citizens with the right to protect themselves and others from becoming the next victims.
Thank you very much. Also speaking now will be Sean Barlow for Mr. Ingalls.
The Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says, a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And in the Michigan Constitution, Article 1, Section 6, it says, every person has the right to keep and bear arms for the defense of himself and the state. Bearing arms is defined as carrying weapons or carrying weapons and using them. John Ingalls supports most current state laws because they are in alignment with both constitutions. However, currently firearms are prohibited in all college buildings by state law. Many colleges also outlaw guns altogether on their campuses. These are clear violations of both constitutions, and John Ingalls is firmly opposed to them. The Michigan Constitution says every person, not every person except those who are enrolled in college. Also, someone who is attacking a college campus won't be deterred by a sign that says no guns, or even an extra 93 days in jail. However, if people are able to carry guns to defend themselves, like the Michigan Constitution says, they'd be much safer. John Ingalls supports allowing firearms on college campuses because it would promote both freedom and safety.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a challenge.
Yes. All right, so you said that you wanted to expand gun laws to allow carrying inside college and university buildings. But could you please explain why that would be a good idea, since the emotional development of the brain isn't finished until age 25. The majority of college students are under that age, and there's underage drinking. People get very irresponsible when they are under the influence.
So first of all, underage drinking is illegal, and also carrying or operating a firearm while intoxicated is also illegal. So having it also be illegal on college campuses is simply a redundancy. And the largest danger on college campus from a firearm would be a shooting. And people who are going to carry out a shooting on college campus are not going to be deterred by gun law.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, also we have Eva Marie Solak speaking on behalf of Mr. Ferry.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, panel, citizens. Candidate Ken Ferry is a defender of the Second Amendment rights of the United States Constitution. As a candidate who upholds the original interpretation of the Constitution, he knows that you, law-abiding citizens, have the right to protect yourselves and your families by bearing arms. Criminals will be criminals. If there are restrictions upon restrictions upon restrictions on guns, criminals will still get their hands on them. It's inevitable. While law-abiding citizens will be completely defenseless. Firearm restrictions are unconstitutional and jeopardize the safety of Michiganders and Americans as a whole. The unconstitutionality of these restrictions has been further exemplified in the 2008 Supreme Court case of D.C. versus Heller. It is your right to be able to bear arms if you so choose and protect yourself and your family. Ferry also understands those concerns you may have regarding criminals legally accessing firearms. Take Houston. Texas is one of the least restrictive states regarding gun control, Houston has a homicide by gun rate of 9 people per 100,000. Compare this with Chicago, which has a rate of 67 people per 100,000. Even though, as Executive Director of the University of Chicago Crime Lab states, Chicago is one of the strictest cities in the nation on gun control. As Governor Ferry plans to implement an updated, rigorous background test for anyone trying to purchase a gun. The major update to the test will include extensive records on persons who have been mentally ill to a point that they are a possible threat to society, and of course, those with criminal records. Those persons would obviously be denied legal access to firearms. The utmost effective way to do a superior job filtering criminal access to arms is to improve your access to self-defense weapons, so you can protect the well-being of yourself and your family. You can do this with Barry as your governor.
Okay, thank you very much. Challenge. Okay, I guess you do.
For the campaign. So you say that you want to remove all regulations and implement a rigorous background check. If you remove all rules and regulations, then what is the purpose of the background checks if, let's say, someone is diagnosed with a mental illness, there are no regulations to stop that person from obtaining a gun? And also, you say in your statement here you are going to be including machine guns in this, so do you think that since there are no regulations, it is morally right to give a mentally ill person something such as a barrel 50 caliber machine gun?
Well, I think there are a few questions within that statement. First of all, I never said I would take away any regulations regarding gun control. I don't know where I stated that. I said that I would implement an update to the current background test. Currently, the laws in Michigan, I don't know if you're aware of this, is that there is a background test and then you can get a license, and I am advocating for updating the background test and making it more rigorous. Thanks.
I would like to challenge.
Okay, we have time for this? Okay.
In your position statement, you say that you wanted to get rid of all current regulations and replace them with a thorough background check. However, current regulations include the restriction on using and carrying firearms while drunk, guns in courthouses, and guns in casinos.
Right. I never said Perry has never stated that he wants to remove any of those regulations.
Okay, it's now time for our panel to have questions.
Yeah, so I have a question for Representative from Ferry. Who will be doing these background checks, and what about them is more deep or more updated than the current background checks?
Right. So we're proposing an update to the background checks that would include like extensive records into the person's mental health. So when the person would go and apply for their weapon, there is obviously a background check, and then a component for mental health is added for that, and we would like to have a more detailed description of their record, of their life, and drunk driving, etc.
Okay, do we not make those accommodations in the background checks now?
Not the mental health, no.
Okay.
You issue a challenge?
Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit to the Ingalls campaign. Now, right now, colleges have the autonomy to create their own gun control rules for their campus. And so would this not be a government overreach and violate the sanctity that these colleges have currently?
Currently, state law prohibits firearms on college campus buildings. So state law is already involved in gun regulations in college campuses. So saying that they are now allowed would not be any more overreach on the government's part.
Okay, thank you. Now moving over to Pierce and LaRange, who both get a chance to answer this question. Currently, as we have seen, gun violence and attacks are on the rise, such like situations, specifically Sandy Hook. Now, is this a good time and a good idea to be shouldn't we be tightening the laws on gun control with the violence that we've seen recently?
Like I said previously, strict regulations only make it more difficult for law-abiding citizens that are carrying guns to defend themselves and the people around them. So, stricter laws are only helping criminals by, giving law-abiding citizens a more difficult chance to actually be able to purchase a gun and carry it and defend themselves and others.
Okay, so on that, then with that stance, why are you not lessening the laws for gun control? Why shouldn't we have more freedom then to protect ourselves if it's really the better path?
As I said earlier, Mr. Lorraine believes that the current gun laws are sufficient for stopping crime, as there have only been 2 mass shootings in Michigan in the past 60 years. I'd say that he believes that that is a pretty good track record, and we are fine with that.
Absolutely not. We have not made the step yet towards lessening gun restrictions. That is definitely the direction that we would go if we were to go in either direction, because there is zero correlation between tighter gun control and less gun violence.
All right, at this point, we're going to move on to audience questions.
Okay.
So I have a question from the audience.
If anyone has an audio, you already got them all? We got a few people with their hands raised, so bring those up right now if you have a question. Can't guarantee it will get asked. Wait a minute, we didn't give those guys a hand for their round right there. Let's do that. We have more like 10 minutes for this round, so.
The first question's from me, so I'll let you get ready.
That would be Mr. Pierce.
All right, so this question from the audience asks, doesn't requiring the police to wait 24 hours defeat the purpose of the cell phone and emergencies bill?
We don't want to overstep our boundaries. It's 24 hours before a person being declared as missing, and Mr. Pierce does not believe the police should overstep that boundary, as he knows that there are some voters who would feel uneasy about it and view it as surveillance.
So this question is going to be for the 3 parties that think that the cell phone tracking bill is a good idea. Starting over here with Willow, and then answering them over. If a corrupt cop is trying to find an ex-wife or an enemy, what's to stop them from using cell phone tracking since a warrant isn't required?
So what differs the fair campaign from all the other ones is that you can opt in and out of this program. So if they were to find a very corrupt cop, were to be using it for the wrong purposes rather than of emergency as defined in the bill, then they can opt out of it right away.
I believe it says in the bill that a police officer has to get this approved by a superior, which we believe would lessen the likelihood of them abusing that system. And we also propose stricter penalties in place. In the bill, it clearly states in terms of imminent threat or danger, so there would have to be proved that the said person that they were trying to find was in a life-threatening or life-altering situation.
All right, for our next question, this is for the Ferry campaign. Who will be funding the new and rigorous background checks?
So the new background check will just be treated by the state of Michigan. So the old bill will be obviously the new
fairly be lobbying for the federal to also be minimum wage in the state of Michigan. But the new would just be funded by the same means as the old one was.
Okay, I have a question for everyone. The question is, how can a candidate be both pro-life and pro-death penalty? And where do you draw the line determining the value of human life? We can start with the range.
So our candidate is not saying he's pro-death penalty or saying he's anti-death penalty. He's simply saying that he does not feel like it was his choice to decide, but the people's choice. He would listen to the people's choice in this matter and carry out what they wish. Mr. Pierce believes that justice is very important, and he does have 3 criteria to qualify for the death penalty, and he's not taking that lightly. He must fit under the criteria, but he's considering the victims' families and how that will help them.
That was an excellent question, and frankly, my answer to that question would be, I don't know. I don't know how a candidate could be pro-life, but also seemingly disregard the sanctity of life through allowing a death penalty, and that's why John Eagles is firmly, among many other reasons, is firmly in opposition to the death penalty.
Yes, whoever wrote that question is truly right. I mean, one life over the other is true. There is no difference. It's human life. So the essence is the same thing with Ferry is against the death penalty very passionately, both for economic reasons and reasons of morality, that you're taking a human life both in the sense of abortion, which is pro-life, and also in the sense of the death penalty.
Okay, keeping with the death penalty theme, we have a question for the range concerning the death penalty. It appears that by allowing the people's voice to decide how we should stand on an issue, you subscribe to the notion that majority equals morality. Is this so?
In a short answer, yes. But the majority that will decide that are the majority that choose to vote. So in essence, you need to get out to the polls. You need to petition. You need to make your voice heard. To be... No.
At this point, we have any further questions?
Okay. Seeing no further questions, are you the folks that are going to give the final closing statements? All right, very good. Let's go to the closing statements. And each will have 1 minute for the closing statement. Hold your applause until they're all done. And we'll start with Mr. LaRange.
One may look over our candidate stances and say, he seems fairly neutral on some of these issues. What is he truly going to do to make Michigan great again? To that we answer, Mr. LaRange will make our education system better, protect our lives and our privacy, but most importantly, he will listen to the voices of the people, which is a tradition that has been sadly lost. We will pay attention to those voices through polling, rallies, petitions, and any other means that can be of use. He is a fair and just man who will truly uphold our Constitution and not take his job lightly. He has the experience as former lieutenant governor to do the job and do it well. LaRange has the integrity to stay true to what he promises and the heart to serve people. So on Election Day, please vote Benjamin D. LaRange for governor. Let's make Michigan great again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We also have Deborah Byerline for Mr. Ron W. Pierce.
Thank you for your time this evening. You've heard the varying opinions, as you can see, Mr. Pierce has specific plans for the betterment of Michigan. In the center of his campaign, he is focused on prosperity and the protections of citizens' rights and justice. Mr. Pierce has a vision for Michigan, a Michigan that reduces spending taxpayers' money, a Michigan whose justice system cares about the safety of its citizens and faces crime head-on, and who does support the sanctity of life and value it, which is why he wants to penalize those who do not care about that. He cares about the families' lives who have been shattered by heinous crime and wishes to implement this additional form of justice. He wishes to focus on economic growth and cutting taxes. He wants to build a Michigan that cares about innocent lives. As governor, Ron Pierce will always listen to your voice and work tirelessly day in and day out to improve our great state in order to build a future you can bank on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, closing statement from Mr. Caleb Lambrook on behalf of John Ingalls.
One last time, I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight and hearing all the campaigns advocate for their candidates. I know, especially towards the crunch time before Friday morning, there's a lot of work that needs to be done for you guys. But for you to invest your time with us tonight, you have a great opportunity. An opportunity to decide SSI's next governor for Michigan, to decide who can best act on the policies you feel should be implemented. John P. Ingalls will be the one to best enact the policies mentioned tonight. Real purpose, real action. His record throughout his entire career has illustrated this. He will enact the vision of specific, explicit goals to make changes in the law, with an entire program devoted to reforming education, with a direct focus on repealing specific gun laws regarding weapons on college campuses, and with a bill ensuring appropriate compensation for those wrongfully imprisoned. All for the rights and liberty of Michigan citizens. Help us defend liberty the right way. Get out and vote tomorrow and start making a change for the better for Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And final closing statement from Timothy Candow for Mr. Ken K. Ferry.
Well, thank you all for coming here. It's very important that you get involved in this election because you'll be deciding the next governor of Michigan. And we've seen the positive change that Ferry would bring to the state of Michigan was elected. The right to own your firearm, to choose if you want to use your phone for an emergency while upholding the essence of privacy, prohibiting the death penalty, and allowing representatives to use their time in a proper way so they can do their job properly. In all the stances that bring us back to the Constitution that founded this great nation while serving the people of Michigan. As we've seen, Ferry has stood up from the rest of the candidates, being the only one who is truly willing to bring the necessary change to make a positive difference. As a veteran, Ferry understands the essence of sacrifice, of commitment, and of love to something that he truly believes in, and that is the people of Michigan and Michigan itself. Thank you, and I urge you to vote for Ken Ferry.
Okay, very good. Give him a round of applause for that great final closing statement. Well done, guys. For those of you voting tomorrow night, you did not debate on stage tonight all of the issues, but the candidates' positions are here. And you are voting on the candidate that you think would be the best governor for the state of Michigan, but you're also voting on the presentations that these campaign teams are making. And I just want to say to all of you guys, you did a very, very good job tonight. I'd like to just recognize them one at a time. And so let's have Mr. LaRange's team stand up and let's give them a warm round of applause. Stay standing. And then we'll also have Mr. Pierce's campaign. Give them a round of applause. One more down is Mr. Ingalls' campaign. Let's give them a round. And then finally, we have the campaign team for Mr. Ferry, the Willow Party. Very excited. You guys, if you want to speak to any of the campaign teams and ask further questions, you're welcome to do that. Maybe hang around for a few more minutes. We have historically at SSI, and this is beyond anyone's imagination, had a 100% voting percentage. That's pretty cool. When you vote tomorrow night, you get an I voted sticker, and we will announce the winner on Friday, I believe. That's right. Is that correct? All right, very good. Let's give our panel a round of applause for their questions. Thank you all. Good job. And for those of you who don't know, this whole debate was live streamed on our SSI Facebook page, and people were watching it all over the place. You guys could have been in front of millions of people. But you can also click on there and watch the whole thing later if you want, okay? So, thank you all for coming. It is now free time until study time. You are dismissed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Josiah DeNoyer, here with my fellow compatriots, Rebecca and Jacob. We will be discussing the gubernatorial debate that just occurred here at the Doty Center. Do you guys have any opening thoughts or statements about how the debate went?
Well, first of all, I was really glad that this year was a little bit more diverse than the last election. I think the candidates, I'm very glad that they had, I think almost every issue, they all had maybe a completely opposite stance. But even on the candidates that were the same, they all had a different way of like reaching their goal. They might have had the same goal, but they all tried to reach it in a different way.
Yeah, I definitely think the uniqueness that was presented was very it was very interesting to watch.
Yes, I definitely agree with my colleagues. Each campaign had different way to like phrase their candidates' goals, and I think that was put really unique, and they must have put in a lot of time to work at that. So yeah.
So, what are your guys' thoughts and opinions about the candidates' different stances on the issue of part-time legislature?
Well, I noticed that only the Ingalls party really supported part-time legislature, and the major question I had about this part-time legislators was that these legislators will only be working for a small margin of the year. And basically, my question is, would their salary be decreasing or would it stay the same? I know they had like a budget cut. They were saving like $7 to $8 million.
Yeah.
So is that coming from a cut in salary? And if that's the case, would these senators have to maybe get a different job throughout the year?
Yeah.
Yes. While interviewing with the O campaign earlier this week, yes, the legislators would make less money, but I think that they would be able to stay in office longer. So I wasn't quite sure if that would be a huge issue, but I mean, of course, the people could always vote for a new legislator.
Yeah, I liked the concepts and ideas that were presented by Ingalls' party. They did bring up the importance of each but each current legislative member living in their own county or district of legislation.
Yeah.
And in that way, they could get to know better the people and what the people really desired, as opposed to if they were just living in Lansing for the majority of the year, as it is now.
I like the pros and cons of both systems. Personally, I think I lean more towards the full-time system, but I mean, any voter could take it a different way as well.
Yeah, those are all very good points. Moving
to the death penalty.
Go ahead.
All right, the death penalty is always a very interesting issue, and the first speaker, and I believe that was the Lorraine party. I thought this was really kind of an interesting way. I'm not sure if this was that they, as a campaign team, really didn't know how to address this issue, and if they took a stance, in which way the voters would accept their stance. Now, I'm glad that they said they would leave it up to the voters, and that at the end of the day, it is the voters' decision. But on all the other issues, they took a stance. So I thought this was just a really interesting case.
Yeah, it could have been taken it was an unexpected decision because they didn't really take a stance at all, and they almost just took the easy way out and didn't come up with any kind of position on what they were going to say. They just said, let the people decide, which is very important. The people's voice needs to be heard, and I appreciated that about their campaign. But also, if the governor has no opinion, how are we going to change Michigan when the governor doesn't have an opinion about changing Michigan, you know?
Right. Definitely. And I think that an issue that was brought up about the death penalty was some campaigns talked a lot about money and finances and how it was going to be more expensive if they filed the death penalty. And I don't know, I feel like they could have maybe talked about other issues regarding the death penalty, but I think that they all did their best, which is what everyone should go for.
Now there was a couple more points that I'd like to bring up, and I thought it was very interesting how the Ferry Party made this point that after some of these convicts were put to death, on average 1 in 25 were found innocent. Now what I'd like to see is how many people were convicted, and then, divide that number by 25, and then see how many of these people were on. Because after a time, it starts to add up. And I know our country was founded on that saying that we would rather protect one innocent citizen than convict 10 guilty ones. I think that's always like a really interesting point.
It's a very interesting point. Definitely something to consider as we think about this election. Moving on to the issue of cell phones and emergencies. This was a very interesting topic, I think. Each candidacy and each campaign team presented a very good view. It's interesting that even though the Ingalls campaign didn't support the bill that was being proposed, they supported a potential amendment to a bill that, according to them, wouldn't pass.
Yeah, I was very glad about the amendments. The two things I'd like to say is that I would like to see an amendment that was kind of a cross between I believe it's the there was two campaign teams. That one. The
Pierce.
Oh, the Pierce. That was it. The Pierce campaign and the Ingalls campaign. Now, what these would do is, first, I think we need to have what the Ingalls campaign said is define emergency, set better bounds on this bill, so we can better see what the effects of this bill are. And then once we better define emergency, then we go and implement what the Pierce campaign team was talking about, which is a stronger penalty for abuse, because some of the House students are debating this sort of things. And that was one of the issues the opposing caucus had against this bill, was that the penalty for abuse wasn't necessarily strong enough. It wasn't enough to deter crime. So first we need to make sure we define what the crime will be, what the definition is, and then we need to implement a stronger penalty for committing that crime. I don't think this bill should be passed in its current state. I think it needs a lot more work before it could be passed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Awesome. So yeah, it was very interesting seeing all the challenges, different opinions, different takes on how this bill should be enacted if it was to be enacted. The next thing that was brought up was the Second Amendment rights of the people. It was interesting. Every single potential candidate agreed that there needed to be at least some degree of maintenance in the laws that were already in place.
Well, I believe the LaRange Party was just, their basic policy stance was upholding the current laws, because that statistic they brought about 2 mass shootings in the last 60 years. That was kind of what they were going on. They were saying, as of right now, we're okay. These laws that we're keeping, they're good. And I think their point is if we try to change these laws, something else could happen. Either by decreasing the regulations, problems could arise, or the same thing with increasing regulations, is that we just need to stay there.
Yes, the gun control is definitely an issue that many people are questioning about, and I think that it should maybe have more thought put into it before it passes, because you never know who could get control of a gun. And like the Willow Party said, yes, there'd be a lot of background checks, but there's always those people out there that could just get a hold of a gun and just, start shooting. So, yeah.
Yeah, and on that serious note, there have been a lot of mass shootings. I don't know if I agree with how lighthearted Pierce seemed to be. I mean, in one of his statements I believe it was campaign creative director Evie, we were on the topic of gun laws, and she brought up lollipops.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something that's serious, and we're talking about children's candy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I fully respect that stance. We need to respect the lives and respect.
But I do believe they made some good points. The one point I kept in mind that they stated was that as regulations increase, so do fatalities. And they brought up some evidence for that, which I appreciated. Another point I was glad that was cleared up in a challenge was that they wanted to legalize guns on college campuses. And my first inclination was, well, that's just more government control. This should be the campus's choices.
Right.
But then either was in a challenge or a question from the staff that cleared it up was that the government is the one mandating that guns aren't allowed on campuses. So the government's already in this. We're just pulling the government back.
Exactly.
And the one other thing I had to say was I was a little bit confused about Ferry's policy was that their basic stance was that more restrictions are unconstitutional.
Yeah, they said it. Exactly.
That was their point, but they never really had any solid plans laid out on actions. The only solid plan was actually an increase of regulations in the background check. But I do think that background check will be helpful. But I'm just a little confused because it seems like they said they're reducing restrictions, but they're actually the only actual solid plans they have is to increase, the background check.
Yeah, and I am absolutely 100% positive. I quoted one of Ferris's campaign team members stating that, quote, "firearm restrictions are unconstitutional," end quote. But then later when they were asked about it, it seemed that they were totally in favor of firearm restrictions.
Yeah, I think the major point was standing alone, the plan they had I think was a good one. I think it's just their ideals that were just maybe a little bit off. But the amendment though that they were planning on making, I do think was a very good amendment, is to have a background on mental health. Now when asked about whether or not we have a background check on mental health, they stated that no, we don't, and that really surprised me.
Yeah,
so
it's important.
I'm glad that they have that stance, but I'm also a little bit confused on that as well.
Yeah, me too. I was a little confused about the whole mental health issue because mental health is definitely a factor in how someone treats and uses a gun, and if they're not in their right state of mind, then the worst can definitely happen.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I don't know what you guys think. I think all the candidates, campaign teams definitely presented very convincing arguments.
Yes.
They all put a good face on their candidates. I think this
Even
definitely helped.
Even I, right now, am not committed to one candidate. I don't even know. I haven't even ruled out any of the candidates yet because to me, the race is still really close. Sometimes I see a point in one of the campaigns, like I'll see them like have a really tough problem with that, but then they'll come back with a great stance on another issue. I think it's a very close campaign. I'm really glad of that. And even though some of these issues where they had completely opposite polar stances on them, I can see the arguments for both sides very well. It's going to be a really tough campaign to decide.
It is. Well, that's all we have for today. Hope everyone enjoyed this live broadcast from Lead News Network. Have a great night.